Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have Kindred Motes joining us. Kindred, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, so Kindred, you are the founder and managing director of KM Strategies Group, a boutique strategy, social impact management, and communications consulting firm. And you've worked with different organizations like the United Nations, the Obama White House, Netflix, Google, and many others. Your campaigns have helped organizations to acquire more than 1 million followers. And I'd love to kind of get our conversation started here today with you sharing a little bit of kind of your background, where you come from, and what were you doing before you got into the world of consulting and running your own consulting business?
I had always been involved in the nonprofit world, kind of both through the civil society side of things, as well as the philanthropic or foundational and then nonprofit social justice organizations. And as part of that work, I had always been really rooted in communications and storytelling. And part of the focus was always very rooted in finding ways to connect issues to new audiences and bring people onto a campaign or onto an issue and give them a pathway to engagement. And as part of that work, I think a lot of it really, its origin just from being, I kind of refer to my generation, micro generation, as millennial classic. We were the first of the kind of younger millennials, but not quite Gen Z. And I was given the keys to the kingdom on social media because nobody else knew how to do it. And they just wanted immediate support. And I think nobody at that point, this was maybe a little over a decade, nobody really understood the value or the importance or even the operational risk of kind of giving that to a junior staffer. But now, of course, it's a very different world and nobody can really credibly make a joke about an intern running a digital strategy anymore because every company, brand, or organization realizes the value of them. But that's where I got my start, really rooted my own kind of growth and experience in communication and advocacy in development from that digital first standpoint. And so I think that as I was looking into what I could do, very much was aware that was important in the modern world, but I didn't want to be pigeonholed by it. And I didn't even want to be pigeonholed by communications. And so everything I did kind of sequentially, I was trying to leverage it for going from communications to sort of philanthropic engagement or donor advisory or social impact work, forming partnerships and campaigns. And so the path, I heard someone say once, and it really resonates with me, that the sort of trajectory of our careers is something that we really only make sense after the fact. And we sort of invent this through line that never really existed just to kind of make sense of it for ourselves. But I do think that to the extent that you can, mine was rooted in really trying to find new, creative, innovative ways to engage people, even if we couldn't actually be in the room with them. And then the coronavirus and the kind of broader pandemic happened, and all of that became even more important. And so I felt like I had the rudimentary skill set, the relationships to really try and kind of go out on my own and start as an individual consultant. And then now kind of try to scale into something a little closer to an agency model, even though we take a little bit of a different tack to that.
Yeah, no, I want to get into that because I know you have kind of a team of maybe 12 or so people that you do work in maybe an interesting model, or be probably interesting for people to kind of hear how you structure this. We'll get into that, but take me back to the early years when you were making the transition from kind of working as an employee and then shifting into becoming a consultant, because it's now been several years since you've done that. How did you announce to the world, or kind of how did you go about getting your first few clients when you were making that transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this is where you're really going to probably see a little bit of my comms leanings coming to the fore. Very much waited until it was ready for the public before announcing it. I wanted to kind of put out some feelers. And I'd had several people asking me for about a year to kind of work with them on the side with some projects. And I'd said, no, I've got a full-time job and I'm not really sure that I'm ready for that, to take that plunge. But then we started working from home at the beginning of the pandemic. And part of my objection was taken away from me. Well, nobody's in the office anymore, not getting direct contact with people. Why not just try going it alone and seeing how it goes? And so I reached out to a couple of people that I had said no to in the past and said, actually, I think I am ready now. If you want to work with me, I'm happy to do that. And created a website, all kind of under the radar, getting things ready. And I knew that when I announced I wanted at least 3 kind of anchor clients that I could say I was working with, because I was very mindful, I guess, probably overly mindful, given that we didn't exist as an organization. But I wanted to really have a legitimacy from the start. And really, I found in partnership building and relationship building, it's always easier to get 2 when you have 1. It's easier to get 4 when you have 2. And it's the very first relationship or client that I think is the hardest. least in my experience. And so I wanted to leverage that from the beginning. And so what I did was a little bit of a mixture. I plugged into some existing teams as a subcontractor. I worked as an individual contractor or consultant with a couple other clients. And then I joined an internal embedded team on one of my early clients to basically be part of the team. I heard one of your recent guests talk about that. And as a recommendation, get stuck in and embedded in a team and have them see you as a team member. And I very much live that. So I can testify that it's valuable, but it's also a lot of time and a lot of effort and energy. But that's how I got started. And I think a lot of it over time was just learning from what worked and what didn't about how I wanted to go from there.
Again, we're going to shift the conversation in a little bit here to more of now as a more established consulting firm, what are you doing, how you're scaling, how you're building, thinking about growth. But just to take us back again to, and hopefully provide some benefit and value to those that are at that earlier stage, knowing what you know now and kind of having lived through that experience of transitioning from working to being your own boss and running your own consulting business, is there anything that you wish you would have done differently? Or if somebody else was making that transition themselves, you would suggest, hey, I made this mistake. Don't make this mistake. Here's what you should do if you're going to be launching a new consulting business.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of things, but to kind of land on one in particular, I think identify what you are comfortable doing and what you're not, and find a way to outsource the things that are harder for you if you can. For me, that was administrative. It was administrative, kind of billing, invoicing, expenses, all of those things, scheduling. And the great thing about that is I didn't find that early on, and I really wish I had, because I spent the first full year kind of doing all my own admin, doing all my scheduling, doing all my billing, all my invoicing, all my expense tracking, and still trying to be the consultant as well, while I was sort of being my own legal team, HR team, accounting team, and marketing team. And so I think that people often, I think, at least I felt this way, are afraid of the overhead and kind of committing things too much too quickly. And I just wasn't aware that there's an incredible ecosystem of people who are like us, who are consultants, but they focus specifically on that component of the business, who are remote or virtual executive assistants. The person I work with is amazing, and she's based in Austin, Texas. She handles all of our administrative work and as much a member of the team as any contractor with issue expertise, because she has one area that she really owns for us. And it's immensely valuable. And I wish that I had the foresight to kind of bring that on early in the process, because it's, compared to everything else, it's incredibly inexpensive, but the peace of mind and the value of the time that you gain back from that really pays for itself. And so that's one thing I would say, figure out what you can outsource that doesn't bring you joy. I'm not just saying outsourcing for the sake of it or just to scale. There are a lot of things that you want to keep inside, especially when you're early on, if it involves any degree of strategy whatsoever. I wanted to be the one doing that work. I didn't want to give it to somebody else. So I said, okay, what can I comfortably get rid of? What can I not? But I wish I had done that from the very beginning, because I think the benefits that I reaped after I made that decision made me wish I had done it a lot sooner.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really great point, because I think very often consultants at the early stage tend to view anything in the form of delegation, outsourcing, or an outflow of money as an expense. And so you, especially when things are a little bit leaner and you're just getting things off the ground, you tend to hesitate, right? It's like, well, that money could be in my pocket. And so maybe I'll wait until I get another client, or wait till I get to 10,000 a month in revenue, or whatever it is, right? And so you keep delaying it. But when you shift that focus, kind of flip it from these things being expenses to these things actually being investments, meaning that they provide a positive ROI, right? It just opens up a whole new kind of realm of possibility. And so it sounds like, yeah, you really experienced that. Fast forward now a little bit to, so you launched the business through organizations and people who knew who you were, knew the work that you did, and said, can you help us? So now you have your first few clients. Take us to kind of more recent times. What is your company doing? What are you guys doing right now when it comes to marketing, lead generation, like building your pipeline? What do you find is working best for you to bring in new clients and create conversations?
It's something that we have started to invest in a little bit, but to be honest, it's still word of mouth that I think is still the primary generator for us. And it's that kind of familiar adage that I think a lot of people have, but it's really true. What we're trying to do, though, I think, is leverage the relationships we have with people who are providing word of mouth, and really trying to almost manage up in the way that we communicate things to current clients, to former clients, to partners, or people in our strategic advisory network, so that we are actually communicating to them about the kind of business that we want. It's so that it's not just, okay, because we did this particular thing for a client in the past, that's all they're going to think of us for when it comes to recommendations or referrals. I think that a lot of times people don't think about how they need to communicate the evolution of their company or their consultancy to current and former clients, because because they knew you 6 months ago or a year ago or even 6 days ago doesn't mean they understand inherently where you want to be 6 years from now. And so I think what we're trying to do is, if we recognize that they are the most valuable relationships we have, how do we think about our marketing plan as actually being investing in them as our critical brand ambassadors, as our allies, as our strategists, and leveraging that in a way that I think pays far more dividends and returns than investing in SEO or digital marketing. That's not to say that those things aren't valuable, but I think that we are starting with the approach of, we know we have existing relationships. How do we leverage those? How do we make sure that we're making the most of them?
Well, so I want to make that like this concept very tangible for people. Can you break down maybe an example, what you're doing? What does that look like? Like, I'm very interested in kind of specifically, what are you communicating to your contacts? And then how are you going about doing that? Are you doing that through a CRM, or what's aiding you in ensuring that you're doing that consistently and effectively and not allowing a lot of opportunities kind of fall through the cracks?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm happy to give a concrete example here. One of them is, at our 1-year anniversary point, we wanted to announce that we had additional support in the form of staff, and we also wanted to talk about new services. And so we devised a whole 1-year anniversary plan in which we announced a social impact award. We announced that we were kind of reorienting to think about our business model as being what we call 10 for impact. We're giving 10% of revenue before expenses are deducted every year to a social cause. And we wanted that to be very central. But we knew that was an opportunity to, one, announce an award, ask for applications and submissions, but also really talk about the work, how we were envisioning that to play a part in a broader scope of services. And really what that came from was understanding that we had philanthropic clients, we had nonprofit clients, both kind of grant making and grant seeking. But we also worked with government organizations. We worked with multilateral institutions. We worked with multimedia campaigns. So when there's a film or a television show about a social justice issue, we have worked on advising those clients, partnering with them. And we really wanted to create not just all of these one-way streets, but really be a conduit for multi-directional traffic kind of across these sectors. And so we thought, okay, what does it mean to say, yes, we will help a nonprofit fundraise or think about their digital giving strategy? But what if we also came to our philanthropic clients and said, we understand the audiences that your grantees are going out in front of and that they're trying to market to. We also understand what it's like to do a competitive grant making process. And we've decided that here are the 6 to 8 learnings that we've taken from our pilot model of giving away $30,000 in an unrestricted grant in a democratized way with a community of advisors. We did that because we didn't just want to be consultants who consult and who kind of operate at the 30,000 foot in the abstract, but we actually want to learn by doing so that we can advise based on the things that we've learned. And so that is the kind of way that we've tried to communicate that to people, because they understand that each piece is connected to a broader whole. It's not just a means to an end, and it's not just a one-off, but it's part of a broader strategy. And so that's the kind of challenge of communicating it, is that it obviously is nuanced and there's a bunch of things going on. But if people can understand that just because you work primarily with a nonprofit or a corporation, it doesn't rule out that we can also be doing those things in the inverse for someone like a grant maker. So that's been an interesting kind of evolution to think about. If you can do one side of it, you can probably do the other. But I think we've not seen a lot of consultants kind of brand themselves that way in the past. And I think it's to the detriment of the work because partnerships get lost.
And so with this example you just shared, you talked about the award, you talked about kind of new services, build more capacity with the team. Is this something that you sent out one email that kind of listed all of that? Or was this a series of emails? And if so, how many and like over what period of time?
So the first email was a kind of omnibus email. It was a bit of a 1-year observation. We basically kind of formally announced ourselves to people who had been in our informal networks, as well as the existing or former clients who'd worked with us in the first year. But since then, we've tried to kind of follow up on those with shorter emails. And I think the idea right now is that we're trying to do quarterly updates, not monthly, because it's just too much right now for what we're trying to do. But quarterly updates that highlight client wins and things we've been able to do in collaboration or in partnership or in service of our clients, and really think about how to leverage that and bring people along and be very specific about what we pull out to highlight that indicates some of the new services, because people already know, for example, that we do audience growth and digital strategy, or they understand that we do a communications audit But what if we're actually going to spotlight a corporate social responsibility campaign, or we're going to spotlight something that we're doing in the multimedia or film sector with social justice? So that's how we're thinking of it right now. And then the last piece I would say that I think actually has played a bigger role than even that is thinking about live events again, live events in multimedia. So around the award, I drafted a couple of op-eds that ran, gave a couple interviews to local reporters in the South because we were focused on investing in a Deep South or Appalachian organization for the first year, because that's where I grew up and where most of the social justice movements in the United States are born. So we wanted to pay that forward there because it gets something like 53 cents on the dollar from philanthropy that other regions get in this country, despite being the place where those monies are most needed. We wanted to focus on that. And that was something that allowed me the opportunity to get on podcasts, to write editorials, to do an interview. And fortunately, the interview that we did was picked up by the Associated Press and ran on the wire, which was kind of crazy. But that sort of opportunity doesn't come if you're so kind of stretched thin or spread thin that you can't really devote time to thinking about how you talk about the work. And so that's where offloading some of those responsibilities, I think, really comes into question, because if you're just focused on an 80-hour client work week, you don't even have a second to think about how you talk about your work externally.
Right. What I'm kind of hearing is, to summarize a bit, that the majority of your business comes from word of mouth, and what you do in terms of not just, you don't just sit and wait for referrals and introductions to come in. You are proactively thinking about how you can add value for your current clients, past clients, prospective clients, and you're in touch with them at least every quarter with a fairly large kind of update, which highlights client wins, might talk about the award, might talk about issues. And you're kind of supplementing that at the same time as those things go on throughout the quarter, looking for opportunities to be on podcasts, to write articles, to have some kind of events, but kind of like the connective tissue between each of your quarterly updates. Am I missing some things there, or anything else you want to add to that?
I think the only additional piece is just leveraging the networks that we have on social media. So using things like LinkedIn to kind of share things that maybe aren't tied to the business itself, but are tied to what I refer to as kind of broader thought leadership. So responding to things that other people are doing. I think that there's a real, understandably, I think in some cases, there's a real zero-sum mentality that a lot of people have when they first get started in consulting. Sharing or celebrating someone else's win might diminish yours. I really have tried to do the opposite of that and really engage with others I know who work in the space. If I see them do a really great case study about work they've done, I share it or I comment on it and know that my broader network will see it as a result. And I think that's just part of what I've always tried to do as kind of a good neighbor strategy, and hope that as things come along over time, people will do the same for me. And I've found that they have. But I think that's the other piece I would say is just kind of celebrating your broader community's wins in the meantime.
It's a real abundance mindset as opposed to a scarcity mindset. The belief that there's more opportunity than any one person or company can handle or manage. And so why not just support each other? So I think that's a great kind of way to think about it. I'd love to hear, Kindred, a little bit more about the award. And I'm wondering, how can others maybe apply a similar concept to their own businesses? Can you kind of break down a little bit more? I mean, I know you said that you take 10% of your top line revenue and that goes to fund a cause. Like, just talk through, is that tied into the award? Is that separate? Because I'm very interested in the award piece, specifically thinking about how could somebody in construction or somebody in nonprofit or somebody in science or whatever industry that they're in, how might they be able to do something similar?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. And it's something that I hope more people will do. And so I think it's an important one to answer. I knew from the beginning, I think part of it was from my work in philanthropy. I learned as part of that work that foundations are required to pay out 5% of whatever they earn in investment income every year towards their work, towards social good, towards causes as grants. And I started really thinking to myself, as part of that, if we exist for profit as a for-profit company, as someone who's only ever worked for nonprofit organizations prior to this work, it's all going to be more than I'm used to. So how do I think about it from the beginning so that it doesn't later on seem like a massive adjustment to carve out money like that or to carve out a percentage? If philanthropy has to give 5% and they exist to do good, what if we actually said businesses had a larger responsibility, not a smaller one, given that we know that the cost of doing business and the effects on others sometimes in the worst parts of our sectors have been extracted or haven't given to the places that made them who they are. And I really wanted to think about that and think about how we could create a small business in Washington, D.C. that operated like a small business on Main Street and really paid our success forward to the community. So we decided to do 10%, and the award is that 10%, at least for the first year. Our first year, we announced a $30,000 unrestricted grant, which is an important piece of it because so much of philanthropic funds are already designed to require you to create a program or to launch an initiative or do a specific thing. And we didn't want to do that. I realized as somebody who had to apply for grants in the past, sometimes you just need to keep the lights on. Sometimes you just need to pay a salary, or you need to think about how to invest in someone to help you with a strategic plan. You don't necessarily need help doing the work because you're doing that every day. So we wanted to think about how we could provide a channel for it. The other piece was that we're offering $15,000 in pro bono consulting for a project like that. So say, for example, somebody does need help with a strategic plan or an end of year campaign for fundraising. We wanted the money that we're giving them to be used for something else and the consulting pro bono support to be used for that, so that they're not having to think, okay, this place wants something from us where we need to give them X% of this money back to consult. I wanted to remove that completely from the equation. And the other piece was that we knew that people who understand this work are the ones who are doing it. And so we reached out to our network of partners, of former clients, of people who are just friends of mine who work in philanthropy or advocacy or the nonprofit world, and asked them to be the advisory committee. So I'm not deciding where the money goes. I'm giving them a short list of the 140 applicants we got and ask them to basically use their expertise to decide where this money can do the most good and give it out. And so I think that's the part that really is replicable. If you have a business and you don't really know where you can be doing the most good, but you have a network of people who are volunteering or working at a shelter or doing any kind of work in a nonprofit setting, they can help advise you. You can lean on your network. And so that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to democratize our giving. We wanted to decentralize our giving, and we wanted to give without strings attached so that they could do the work.
I'm wondering, when you talk about these 140 applicants that came in or applied, I mean, who are these people? And I don't mean necessarily specifically who they are, but at a high level. And then I'm wondering, how did they find out about the opportunity to even tap into a $30,000 grant or that this was available?
There's a reason that you don't know that because we haven't announced who's getting the award yet. We're announcing in August, but we put out a call in May. And so the organizations are based in 10 states across the Deep South and Appalachia. And we wanted to focus on that region, as I mentioned before, just because of the lack of investment. But we wanted to specifically focus on some things that weren't being funded when we did an assessment of the region. That's one of the services we offer for foundations or for nonprofits, is a bit of a landscape analysis. We did that on our side and said, here's where we need to be giving. Here's where that giving can do the most good. And we specifically focused on smaller communities because your Atlantas, your Charlottes, they have massive donors and very large foundations. That's not true in a town with 50,000 people in West Virginia. So we wanted to focus on those folks. And we reached out to our partners. The great thing about working in the nonprofit sector or nonprofit adjacent is that I wrote an op-ed in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. We put it out through the nonprofit publications. We put it out on philanthropic listservs. But I think the biggest challenge was that we were afraid it wasn't going to get in front of anybody. And that's where I think having a communication strategy that we devised, because we work in communications, was really helpful, and doing things like multimedia interviews, editorial pieces, and that kind of thing. But the biggest thing I think to say about the organizations is that we want to fund all of them. I mean, the thing is, it has not been an easy process. A humbling and surprising and really sad part of the process has been me realizing I wish I could give this 30,000 in cash and 15K in pro bono support to all of them because they're doing incredible work. And so our challenge to ourselves has been, how do we scale this? How do we leverage our lessons learned to encourage other people to be doing this kind of thing? How does 10 for Impact become more than just the sum of KMSG? How does it become a kind of collaborative network of people who are doing this? And so that's where we're trying to do things like write for the Chronicle of Philanthropy or Stanford Social Innovation Review and use this as a case study of what other people could be doing if they really wanted to have social impact baked into their business from day one.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
Just want to make sure I'm kind of understanding this correctly in terms of how you got these different organizations to find out about the opportunity. You're on podcasts, you're writing articles, you're also tapping into your network So it could be clients, current, past, team members, and saying, hey, here's what we're doing, spread the word. And social media, and that kind of just takes on a bit of its own life. And that's how people start then applying. Is that correct? Or is there anything else missing from that?
No, that's correct. We did a little bit of promotional support on social media when we would have the articles come out in terms of just kind of sponsoring or boosting them to the region where we wanted applicants from, those 10 states, but very low level. I mean, maybe like $100 in sponsored post on Twitter or Instagram, that kind of thing. So it's very much word of mouth driven.
I want to kind of explore a little bit more about your team, because I think you have now about a dozen or so people that are on your website. They're positioned as strategic advisors. What does that mean? What does that term actually mean? And then I'm wondering, well, how are they actually structured inside of your organization in terms of part-time, full-time, 1099, right? Contractors for those people outside of the US or otherwise. Kind of what does the makeup of the business look like and why I call them strategic advisors?
Yeah, so I was really mindful from the beginning that I wanted to build the company in a way that was sustainable, but also scalable and didn't require too much cash burned. And I'm really proud of the fact that from the beginning, we never had to take on any loans or do anything to build the business. It was just rooted in saving as much as I could every month after the client work and getting a kind of operational reserves in place. And I think that's, to your question earlier about something I would recommend to people that I didn't do soon enough. I think that's another one. One, because it allows you to scale in a way that you don't feel like you're having to take on new work, but you're also not constantly in that scarcity mode where you're afraid that you're facing a fiscal cliff in a month or 2 months. And so with that in mind, I was really still mindful that I didn't want to overextend. And I knew that there was too much work at that 1 year point for me to be the only person doing it still. So I knew I had to bring in additional support. But I didn't think that it was quite the moment to say, okay, I'm going to hire 2 full-time employees and really kind of base us in one place. I wanted to be nimble. I wanted to be flexible. And so what I came up with at the time, working with some other advisors, was that we wanted to do a strategic advisor model where we choose people who are excellent at their field of focus, at their issue area, their place of expertise, and really embed them as part of a project. But they wouldn't be there forever. They would be there for as long as they are needed, valuable, and necessary to a particular client. We do have contractors who are more issue specific, who do actually stay on, work with us over a longer period of time, focusing on one issue area. So for example, we have someone who leads on philanthropy and development and fundraising. That's very much one coordinated lane. And so that's a full-time thing, but as a contractor. Secondly, we have someone who's full-time doing advocacy, public affairs, government relations, that kind of thing, because there's so much of a through line on those 2 issue areas with all of our clients. But on something more specific like graphic design or podcasting production or partnerships and corporate social responsibility, we have people who are part of our strategic advisory network that we say their agreement is to be available for 6 to 12 hours a month in a given period when there's a contracted client that is interested in that kind of work, and we can fold them in. Because one of my biggest frustrations with consultants, I was very much team no new consultants when I was in-house in communications and partnerships, because I felt that so much institutional memory was lost and so much expertise was being forfeited for working with a firm or an agency where they were being paid $40,000 to $60,000 a month on retainer, but the people who were actually doing the work for that client were associates straight out of college, and the principal would show up on 1 or 2 calls, and that was it. And I felt really personally offended by that, because I was somebody who had been at that point in my career, maybe in the field for 6 to 8 years, but certainly more than 1 to 2. And I saw the consulting agency kind of making at that point in a month what was half my annual salary. And I was like, okay, something's getting lost here. And so I didn't want to be an agency as we were growing that forfeited dedicated expertise and quality time for scale. I wanted to have both. And so the solution to me was, well, I can't afford to have an expert on the staff at 100% of their time, but I can have them for 20% of their time or 10%. So let's think about how to do that and do a little bit of walking before we run, so to speak, and see if there's a model there for that. And fortunately, there really has been. I think people really understand that the landscape of consulting and the workplace has really shifted. And it's not a red flag if 3 different firms are co-bidding on a single project under a single masthead. That's collaborative work in the same way that 3 verticals within a corporation can work together on a project. You can have communications, development, and operations working together on a project. Why not think about it that way for consulting?
It's such an opportunity for many consultants who are concerned and are wondering, how do we compete against larger firms. I mean, what you just described right there, Kindred, is the classic kind of situation of why consultants can have a bad name. A large firm comes in, they get paid a lot of money, but the person at the top who really played the role in winning the business, once they've won the business, they're essentially gone, right? They disappear. And then you have these people who are essentially getting paid to learn on the job. So for everybody, right, who's listening and joining us, if you can structure your business in a way where you are more involved, or you can communicate that what your clients are getting is real expertise and that's what they're paying for, that's a point of differentiation between paying a lot of money to have junior people learning, right, as they go along. Again, that could be a real point of differentiation. So just something to kind of explore if you're currently communicating that enough in your proposals, in your conversations. So fast forwarding a little bit now, you have your team in place. You work with a dozen or so kind of team members, strategic advisors. Some are on a more full-time basis. Others, you bring them just when you need them. How do you manage all of that? I know you said you have somebody who really does kind of like administration and so forth, but in terms of project management and managing how all the pieces come together to ensure that there's still excellence for your clients, is that your role, Kindred, or do you have somebody else who's leading that?
It's currently my role, although I will say in the spirit of full transparency, it's something that I'm very much trying to kind of operationalize as its own position. I think that it's one of the things that I've identified as part of this process. One is we have scaled and we are working in a more coordinated fashion across folks who feel like they're full-time team members because they are issue expertise agents. And then they're the people who are kind of from time to time brought in. But it's something that it feels necessary to me to have a dedicated kind of operation managing director or something very rooted in the client specific work, because as I have moved a little bit farther away from the direct day-to-day client work, I have found that a necessary part of scaling is business development. It's relationships management. It's going out and networking and going to conferences and events and talking to people like you and having the opportunity to continually learn so that I'm actually bringing those things that I'm learning back into the company. At the same time, the work still has to get done, right? Otherwise, there isn't a company. And so I'm really trying now, working with a close friend who has done operational consulting and has really internalized a lot of that into his thinking to advise me. And that's something that I really think is going to be the next big piece of the puzzle, is that we have to invest in that, because I think otherwise it's very difficult to keep everything running. Now, I will say in the meantime, we've invested in kind of operational planning or CMS investments. So we use like Asana and we're tracking things there on a project specific level and have divided that by clients. We communicate via Slack. We just had an operations planning retreat where we spent 4 or 5 hours going through best practices and getting everybody on the same page so that we're not having somebody text and somebody else email while someone else is slacking. And that has been a big kind of adjustment when you have this sort of big unwieldy network of strategic advisors. The other piece I will say to anyone who's considering that model, one, I highly recommend it and you should try it. Two, it's going to take a lot of kind of cat herding from time to time, because I wanted those people because they had full-time jobs. I think that is a value add, not a liability. I think that's how they keep learning. It's how their connections stay sharp. But it also means that you're going to have to do a little bit of managing up and communicating when you need people, because they're not going to proactively seek it out. So think about how you communicate that work and the needs ahead of time so that there's no 5-alarm fire when you sign 2 new clients and nobody has capacity anymore.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, it's something that I talk a lot about with clients in terms of like the importance of building that bench of talent before you even need it, right? So you're in a position of kind of power and control, not in the negative sense, but more in the sense that, as you said, if a project or opportunity comes on, or even before it comes on, you have the confidence to go out and win a bigger project because you know that you can deliver, you will have the capacity. What are you doing, or what have you found most valuable or effective to make sure that you always do have enough people, enough kind of bums on the bench so that there's talent, and that you want to go after a project or something comes in, you're well positioned to handle it?
This may not be the best business advice. I can't say I haven't gotten an MBA or gone to business school, and really communicative with the full team. And in the sense of sharing what our projections look like, what our revenue minus expenses look like, being really transparent from week to week and saying, look, things look great for the next 3 months. If we want things to look great for the next 6 months or 9 months or a year, we're going to have to go do A, B, and C by X date, and really kind of making sure, because I think that uncertainty is a real killer in creativity. It's a killer in collaboration, and it's also a killer in trust. And so I really wanted to bring people along and not have them wonder whether I know something that they don't, even though the business is 100% mine. I don't have a partnership model, at least right now. But I think I view anyone's time that's being committed as part of kind of stakeholder investment, for lack of a better word, in the company. And especially given that I work with people I've worked with in the past, I view that as an actual investment. And so that's one piece. Make sure that you're communicating so that people don't have to wonder, because I think in moments of wondering is when people start thinking, okay, should I be waiting for the other shoe to drop? Should I be looking for what's next? The second piece is actually in investing in that pipeline. So we are working with right now with a summer fellow who was our first fellow, and we only had one. In the fall and winter term, we're working on bringing on 2 fellows. And the first summer fellow's task is to kind of build a repository of content.
Sorry to interrupt, Kindred, but just explain for those who aren't familiar, what does a fellow mean?
A fellowship is essentially a paid internship for people who are coming out of university or they are in graduate study, kind of between study, whether it's in the summer where they're looking for kind of more full-time adjacent employment, or during term when they want something for 10, 15 hours a week. Essentially, it's that kind of academic model of we're going to pay you. We're not just going to take your work and your labor and pay you nothing. So that's what we mean by that. And so we're working with the summer fellow right now. She's going to do work in Spain afterwards as part of an actual fellowship, academic fellowship. And so we're losing her. So we've said, okay, and we knew that from the beginning, let's build a repository, a pipeline, share your lessons learned, your best practices, document the things you're working on. So that is there for the next class of fellows when they come in the fall and the winter. And for the price of someone who is younger and straight out of college or still in college, we are getting people who are very bright, who are very ambitious, who are very committed to the work, but just want an opportunity to get embedded in it. And we can get 20 hours a week times 2 people. And that essentially gets you to a full-time position in a way that feels scalable and sustainable. So you're probably sensing a pattern there. Part of it is we're trying to pilot things before we jump straight off into them and make sure that we're learning from each piece of it. Nothing's kind of getting left on the table once we finish a project or stop working with someone. We want that to be a continual learning process.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice and something that probably a lot of people could pull from, which is as you bring somebody in, make sure you're documenting what they're developing, because even if they don't work out or they leave, planned or unplanned, you now have that asset in place, or you have that opportunity to now improve it. And then you bring the next person on and they can hit the ground running a lot faster. So I was just actually talking about that on a previous podcast. So I think, yeah, that's great advice there. Before we wrap up, a couple more questions here for you. Then I want to make sure people can learn more about where to find you and the best place to go. But if you look at your workday, your week, Kindred, and where you feel, okay, like I'm able to achieve my level of performance, that I feel I'm effective, I'm doing great work, and you can trace it back to 1 or 2 things, likely a habit, something you do every day or on a very regular basis. What are 1 or 2 things that kind of come to mind for you that you feel are really integral to the success that you're creating?
So I try to be very intentional about having a routine. I think it's very difficult right now, given the changing work dynamics and people working from kind of all over and the remote nature of our work for many people. But I got an office space actually about 15 minutes from my apartment, and I walk there every morning. I feel like the distance of just going from my apartment to the office and from the office back home puts me in that rhythm again of, okay, even if I'm there at 7 in the morning and even if I leave at 8 at night, there's an opening of the book, there's a closing of the book, there's coming into the building, there's leaving the building. And I think that intentionality in that routine is something that quite understandably we all lost for a period of time if you worked from home. If, a lot of people didn't, but if you did, you maybe fell out of that practice. And so that's one piece. I think the broader answer there is that I do try and find time to be alone with my thoughts. And I think that's part of what a commute is for me. It's a way to think about what I'm going to do on my way in. It's a way of decompressing and thinking about what I've been doing when I leave. Sometimes I'll take a longer route and I'll end up walking 2 or 3 miles on the way in or on the way home, and really just thinking about my day, what went well, what didn't, what do I want to accomplish out of the day, what do I don't. Being the sort of person who gives yourself permission to ask those questions and actually hold yourself accountable, not beating yourself up. But the great thing about having 15 minutes for that is you can beat yourself up for 14, take a minute and say, okay, but actually what's actionable from this? What are we going to learn from it? And then you're home and you can be like, all right, it's time to go cook dinner or go for a run or watch Netflix or whatever. But I think having those practices and being really intentional. And for me, it's just the routine again, getting back in that routine that's been really helpful.
I think that's incredibly important. Not enough people create that time. And I think we're all guilty of this at one point or another. Science people kind of reference this as strategic thinking time or CEO time, right? Which is the role that you play in your company. But it's really applicable to everyone. It doesn't matter whether you are in the organization and you're an employee or a contractor, or if you are the founder and CEO. I mean, making time to think about what went well or what you're going to do, or how can you structure your time to focus on the highest priority areas where you can create the most value. This is really what separates probably your success, my success, the success that we're all having from those who struggle, because we're prioritizing, we're able to be thoughtful about what we're doing rather than just putting our heads down, cranking the work and hoping that things actually work out. So I think that's really good advice to leave us off here. Final question, as I like to ask everybody, the last 6 months or so, one book that you have read or listened to, could be fiction or nonfiction, just anything stand out you would gift to somebody or give somebody, or just say, hey, I really think you might enjoy this.
Yeah, for sure. I recently listened to a book. I do a lot of actual reading, but I listen to books when I'm on walks. And so this was something where I was doing what I mentioned as a good practice before and listening to it, called Fear of Falling by Barbara Ehrenreich, famous sociologist and journalist in the US. It's all about the upper middle class and how the kind of fear of falling back into the middle class or the working class drives their behavioral patterns and habits. And a lot of those are tied to the things that have been recently highlighted as kind of bad kind of work habits that people have tried to correct for in the post-pandemic period. But I think the reason that I think it's really interesting and I would recommend reading it is it gives a glimpse into the sort of unconscious ways in which we all do our work, perform our lives out of a fear of what our work says about us and how we show up for other people. But it also shows the differences of how we aren't thinking about other people. So even when I said something like, oh, we all were working from home, well, actually, a lot of us weren't, right? A lot of us were essential workers or didn't have the luxury of being able to work from home because we weren't office workers. So that has informed a lot of my thinking about how to build kind of a company focused on social impact, investing in the award and really trying to think about ways in which we have cross-class conversations, because I think that's something that we don't talk enough about, at least in the United States. We like to pretend we don't have a class system. And I think that economic data for decades has been saying that we do and that we need to pay attention to. So this book actually came out, I think, in the 80s originally, and there was a new foreword that recently came out in a republishing. And it's just really depressing that it's still as valid and relevant as it is. But I think it's an incredible listen or read. And then I think other people should check it out.
All right, we're going to link that up in the show notes. And then the other thing that I want to make sure that we can link up and point people towards, Kindred, is your website or kind of the one destination so they can learn more about you, your company. Where's the one place they should go?
Sure thing. So if you're interested in learning more about my company, I would encourage you to visit kmstrategiesgroup.com and also on Twitter at Kindred Motes.
All right. We will have that linked up. Kindred, again, thanks so much for coming on and appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a pleasure.